It took me years of quilting before figuring out how I like to machine bind my quilt. I think everyone likes to do this a little bit differently, so I'm going to show my preferred method from start to finish how to machine bind my quilt. First, I'm grabbing my quilt and picking a spot to start binding. I actually attach it onto the front. This is why I think it took me so long to kind of figure things out, because I was actually attaching to the back, which I think is pretty popular, but this is just how I like to do it. I usually pick around the middle of one of my sides. I don't want to be too close to a corner, and then I leave like anywhere from 8 inches to like a whole foot of a tail. So I begin by placing the raw edge of the binding, so the fold is to the left and the raw edge is to the right, and I'm going to attach this around the entire perimeter of my quilt using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. For binding strips, I am using 2.5 inch strips that are folded in half. I am using my walking foot here because that kind of evenly feeds the fabric through a little better, but here's your reminder to leave that tail of 8 to 12 inches unsewn. You could do even longer if you need to, and just start stitching all the way along that first edge of your quilt. As we approach the corner, we're going to want to slow down. I'm going to be doing what is called mitered corners here. If you're newer to sewing and you're not exactly sure how large a 1/4 inch is, you could go ahead and bring a ruler in at this point and mark a 1/4 inch from the corner of your quilt, and then continue sewing until you get to that 1/4 inch mark. When you get there, make sure your needle is down, and then you're going to rotate your quilt 45 degrees and then sew at a diagonal towards the corner, and then we cut our thread and remove the quilt from the machine. Then we're going to rotate our quilt 90 degrees and make our mitered corner. I start by folding it upwards and making a 45-degree angle from the corner to the fold of the binding strip. And then I fold it back down on itself. You can put like a ruler or a pin here, and we're gonna fold it back down along the next edge of our quilt at a 90-degree angle so it lines up just like this. You can clip it or pin it in place and bring it back to your machine and start right on the edge, sewing again along the entire edge of your quilt a 1/4 inch from the raw edge. You will want to do this around your entire quilt and all 4 corners until you get back to around the point where you started. I like to leave a big gap here. Most would probably suggest only like 8 inches, but I probably do like almost double that. I just like to have more room to work with my quilt and the binding to attach the binding strips together. If you want to see how I attach these, check out my next video, but for now, just use your preferred method to attach the binding strips and then finish attaching the binding to the front of your quilt. Once the binding is fully attached to the front, we're going to go ahead and I like to press it upward, and then we're going to fold it over and clip it in place. I actually really love using glue basting here, but you can just use binding clips if you'd like. When folding over your binding, make sure you are just covering up that previously stitched line where you attach it to the front. I fold mine over just a hair over that stitch line. If you want to try glue basting instead of using the clips, I just use Elmer's liquid glue, and I put a thin strip along where I'm going to be pinning it down, and then put my iron over it and give it a good press. This makes it stick in place so that when I bring it to my machine, I'm able to sew it on nicely and it does not shift at all. Once you have your binding folded over, I actually sew back on the front of my quilt again. So the folded part is on the back. I'm not seeing it here, but I'm confident that I have covered up my previous stitch line, and then I stitch in the ditch on the front. So this is in between the binding and my quilt. I stitch right in that spot there. This makes it kind of discreet looking on the front, and then it catches my binding right on the back, right by the folded edge. I do this around the entire edge of my quilt, and this is what it looks like. There's the front and the back. I've really been meaning to learn how to hand stitch my binding, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet, and I was too excited to finish this quilt.